Today we're going to be taking a focused look at those fire-breathing dog horses of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Serberys Sulphurhounds and Raiders. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. So it's certainly been big news for the Adeptus Mechanicus recently, with Engine War dropping, and it really does look like the army has taken an absolutely phenomenal power boost, as well as all of the nasty tricks that they can just implement with their core strategies. These new fast attack choices certainly give them some expanded options in game. In this review we'll be taking a look at the datasheet for the Serberys Sulphurhounds and Raiders, talking about any obvious buffs or synergies on the tabletop, and how I would personally think about using them in game in 40k. In the background, it's a great honour to be promoted from the Skitarii Maniples to the Serberys Cavalry Corps. These forces ride swift quadrupedal steeds that manoeuvre easily over the most shattered terrain, while their riders are mag-locked and gyro-stabilised into position, allowing them freedom to use both arms to fight the enemy. Serberys Raiders are long-range scouts and outriders, excelling at flanking enemy positions and picking off unprotected assets. The riders' skulls are augmented with advanced ocular arrays, and with a suite of other advanced sensors, including heightened olfactory senses, these guys are dogged and feared trackers. The Serberys Sulphurhounds, on the other hand, are far more direct in their approach, being employed as shock cavalry and line breakers. They excel at obliterating infantry formations with their phosphor pistols and the fearsome sulphur breath of their mounts. Let's see what these guys can do when we get to an actual game of 40k then. We'll start by taking a look at those Sulphurhounds. These guys initially come in units of 3, consisting of 1 Sulphurhound Alpha and 2 Serberys Sulphurhounds. At base, each Sulphurhound costs 18 points per model, though the Alpha is equipped with some more fancy equipment, and will cost you 25 points instead, making a base unit of these cost you 61 points. Each standard Sulphurhound is armed with 2 phosphor pistols, sulphur breath and clawed limbs, where the Alpha is equipped with a power maul, a phosphor blast pistol, and clawed limbs and sulphur breath as well. They have a fairly respectable stat line, with 12-inch movement, weapon skill 4+, ballistic skill 3+, strength and toughness 3, 3 wounds, 1 attack, leadership 6 and a 4+ save, and the Alpha has 2 attacks and leadership 7 instead. It's quite nice to see that they've got 3 wounds. That'll certainly keep them a lot safer than I was assuming they would be. I was honestly expecting these guys to be 2 wound models. Good ballistic skill will keep them accurate with those phosphor pistols, but it's a little bit disappointing that their weapon skill is only 4+, as it does hamper them a bit when they get to close combat. In terms of their armament, those phosphor pistols are 12-inch pistols with strength 4, AP -1 and damage 1, and they also ignore cover. The phosphor blast pistol that the Alpha is armed with is the same but strength 5, and their mount sulphur breath is a flamer type weapon, pistol D6, strength 4, AP -1, it auto hits, and again it ignores cover. Basically within 8-inch range, a unit of these guys is going to do a lot of damage to any entrenched infantry. You can have up to 9 of these guys in a unit, so a maxed out unit of 9 will be killing around about 23 guardsmen in one single turn, whether they're in cover or not. If they're taking aim at Space Marines, then it roughly equates to about 10 wounds on Primaris Intercessors or 10 dead Tactical Marines. They do have a pretty fearsome bite when up close, all that for a reasonable points cost of 169 points. When they do get into close combat, they of course have the clawed limbs of their horses, and these are just a +1 strength weapon, where when the bearer fights, it makes 2 additional attacks with this weapon. So each standard Sulphurhound is going to be getting 3 attacks, hitting on 4s at strength 4, and the Serberys Alpha is going to be getting 4 attacks, with 2 of them using the upgraded power maul profile. These guys are essentially Vanguard on horses, so they do have that helpful rad saturation rule, which means you subtract 1 from the toughness characteristic of the enemy units without the vehicle keyword, while they're within 1 inches of the units with this ability. That's going to be very helpful when they're fighting any sort of infantry. Space Marines will essentially be toughness 3 against these guys, and Guardsmen will be toughness 2, so they'll be wounding on 2s with those attacks. Again, if we're looking at a maxed out unit, that's going to be an average of 3 Tactical Marines dead, or 3 wounds on Intercessors, 9 dead Orc Boys, or about 7 or 8 dead Guardsmen. In general, they're going to be a lot stronger against anything with a weak armor save, as bar that power maul, they just don't have any AP. The unit can swap out 1 bit of war gear. You can't do anything else for the Alpha, but 1 in every 3 models can take a Phosphor Blast Carbine instead of a Phosphor Pistol. The Phosphor Blast Carbine is a longer range weapon. It's a 24-inch range Assault 4 weapon with strength 5, AP -1 and damage 1. Again, with the phosphor weapons, it ignores cover. This one costs 14 points more over your trade out of the pistol, so that particular Sulphurhound will cost you 32 points. I think it's an interesting choice. It certainly adds some ranged punch to the unit, and means they could actually contribute before they get right up close to the enemy. But on the other hand, you will have the choice of either firing this one or the Sulphur Breath and Pistol, and that's going to be a pretty tight choice, to be honest. So really this weapon's only actually going to upgrade your damage output at long range, it's not really going to do anything for you at close, as you've got the slightly unhelpful choice between one of two. I think my instincts would be to leave them off myself, but I think they're at least reasonably well pointed. You are essentially getting yourself 12 heavy bolter shots at range if you do take 3 of these guys in a big unit of 9, so it's not the worst thing in the world. In terms of special rules, they have Canticles of the Omnissiah, as you'd expect. As per normal, things like Shroud Psalm and Benediction of the Omnissiah are going to be handy, although the Fight Phase ones aren't bad, seeing as they do at least have some reasonable melee output. They also have Bionics, as per most Skitarii units, for a 6+ invul save, so a little protection against the highest AP weapons. And finally, they have the very helpful Pistolier special rule, which means that they can still fire pistols that they're equipped with, even if they're advanced. It doesn't say that you treat them like assault weapons, so I believe that you can happily just advance them and plug away with the pistols at no minus to your ballistic skill. This is really quite handy, as it means that you could potentially have an 18-inch movement out of these guys before they plug away, and it means on average you can get that all-important Sulphur Breath in range if you're around about 23 or 24 inches from your enemy targets, so that's really quite a good threat range for their highest amount of firepower. Obviously there's a bit of a trade-off though, as this does preclude you from charging should you want to. Overall, I feel like these guys look like pretty strong anti-infantry cavalry, a reasonable all-round defensive profile, that 3 wounds is very handy, and they at least pose some melee threat to infantry as well. It is worth noting that in combat, their cavalry keyword might trip them up a bit. It does mean that they can't enter certain types of terrain and can't go to top floor ruins, which means that enemies could hide from them, so just bear that in mind. They aren't too bad at clearing out infantry from terrain though, with all that ignores cover. Let's move on over to the Serberys Raiders now. Now these guys are also fast attack, and they're sort of like sniper outriders of the Skitarii force. Now these guys are a lot cheaper than the Serberys Sulphurhounds, they're only 14 points per model, and the Alpha's equipped with an Archeo revolver, which he does have to take, but this one's only 2 points over, so he's 16 points, and your minimum size unit is 44 points. You can get a lot of these guys with not all that much investment. Again, they have the same profile, 12-inch movement, good ballistic skill, average weapon skill, a mighty 3 wounds and a 4+ save. Sadly their horses can't breathe any fire, but the standard Serberys Raider is equipped with a galvanic carbine and a cavalry sabre. The galvanic carbine is sort of like an 18-inch sniper rifle really, 18-inch assault 2 weapon with strength 4, AP nothing and damage 1. But it does have the galvanic type special rule, where you roll an unmodified wound roll of a 6, it makes the AP of this weapon go to -1. This combines with their Eye of Serberys special rule, which means that they can target characters even if they're not the closest with any ranged weapons, and just in general, if any ranged weapon rolls a wound roll of a 6+, then it inflicts 1 mortal wound on the target, in addition to any other damage. Now these guys are cheap and put out 2 essentially sniper shots each. Never mind their movement and everything else, they're just quite a cheap source of sniper fire in the 41st millennium. The Alpha does have one of the carbines as well, which is helpful, so a full unit of 9 of these guys, which would cost you 142 points, will be putting out a whopping 8 sniper shots, which just completely unmodified will do about 4 wounds to any Space Marine character, once you've taken the mortal wounds into account, and they're not all that bad against infantry either, killing around about 8 boys per turn at 18-inch range. They are far less damaging against infantry than the Sulphurhounds are. That 18-inch range is really helpful, and being able to double up as longer range snipers is pretty cool as well. The cavalry sabres are strength +1, AP -1, and again they have the clawed limbs of the horses, so individually their attacks are a little bit better than the Sulphurhounds in combat, as one of them will be at AP -1, but bear in mind that they do lack that rad saturation rule, which is quite a big deal to be honest when they're strength 4, so I think that the Sulphurhounds will model for model still outperform the Raiders in close combat. Bear in mind that the Raiders are 4 points cheaper though, which is a big deal. In terms of options, one Serberys Raider can have an enhanced data tether, allowing to re-roll failed morale tests, which could actually be a reasonable pickup if you are taking a 9-man unit of them. It's a 5-point upgrade, so not exactly breaking the bank, and they do have a few helpful special rules as well. Firstly, Canticles of the Omnissiah. I suspect that in general the ranged ones might be better for them. They've got the 6+ invul save from Bionics. We already talked about Eye of Serberys, but their last rule is Skirmishing Line, which is essentially a pre-game movement option. At the start of the first battle round, before the first turn begins, the unit can move as if it were your movement phase, and it must end the move greater than 9 inches away from enemy models. This means that these guys could easily get a first turn charge should they need to, as they'll be moving 12 inches before the game, then moving 12 inches in your turn, so they'll already be pretty much within the opponent's deployment zone straight away. It's going to be pretty hard to keep characters safe from those shots, and then hopefully they can also pile in and deal some decent damage to enemy light infantry should they be about. I think that these guys could also be pretty excellent screening for your Admech forces, particularly against melee due to their stratagem, which we'll get onto in a bit. So overall, these guys are point for point quite a lot tougher than the Serberys Sulphurhounds, just because they're so many points less, generally less damage dealing on the whole, but a bit more flexible having the extra range and ability to snipe characters. So let's talk about a few buffs and synergies that we could see for them in game. First of all, you have the option to choose which Forge World they come from. As always, Mars is a decent option for getting more flexibility with canticles, and Wrath of Mars could be an interesting combo with those Sulphurhounds with the sheer amount of shots and hits they'll get on their opponents. Metallica could potentially make the Raiders be able to advance and shoot with their weapons for no penalty, so that would be a meaningful movement buff, but to be honest they do have quite a lot of movement already with the 12-inch pre-game move and 12-inch every turn. Riser will make them just a little bit more dangerous in combat than they normally be, and Synergies 8 is just generally good for keeping them a little bit safer at range, although both of them being fairly close range, they would need to be moving up the board. Still, it could keep them safe from some backfield fire support, for example. I feel like these guys could really benefit from some of the custom Forge World traits, in particular from the Rad Saturated Forge World. They have an option to make the Rad Saturation be 3-inch in range and also give -1 strength as well, which is obviously excellent for those Serberys Raiders, and it means their foes could be -1 toughness even when they shoot them with all those phosphor and sulphur breath weapons. Naturally you need to be incredibly close for that to work, but if you could pull it off, that's going to send their damage absolutely into the sky. I think that the Expansionist Forge World one is going to be particularly good for extra AP. Their primary trait is that the first round of combat improves the AP of their weapons by 1, and this is just excellent when they've got a whole load of low AP attacks, just like their horse's clawed limbs have. This is great on both units, I think particularly on the Sulphurhounds, because they have 3 attacks at strength 4 AP nothing, so jumping to AP -1 and -1 toughness is absolutely great. They also have a secondary trait as well that allows them to advance and fire assault weapons without any penalty at all, which could be good for either the Raiders or the Phosphor Carbines in the Sulphurhounds. In terms of character support, naturally things like Tech Priest Dominus or Belisarius Call are great for rerolls, but a Tech Priest Manipulus could be a reasonable utility piece as well. +1 to move, advance and charge is really quite good when you need to be getting up close and personal with those Serberys Sulphurhound short-ranged weapons. I think though that his +3-inch range that he could give them would be useful, but it's going to be hard to coordinate with him there, seeing as he can't move for this, and these guys need to be moving fast to close with the enemy. If you can make it work though, an 11-inch Flamers sounds fun to me. Also, one way of getting around morale for these guys could be to combine them with moving up with a nearby hovering flyer, maybe something like a Fusilier aggressively getting into enemy lines, and if the unit has a command uplink, then they can get Leadership 9, which is a significant boost to stopping them running away. In terms of stratagems, these guys have 2 ones all unique of their own from the new Engine War book, and I certainly think that they're both pretty usable. These Sulphurhounds have the Olfactorum Aggressor Imperative, which is a 1 command point, and it basically allows them to automatically advance 6 inches, no questions asked. It also means that they shoot as if they didn't move this phase, which I think only applies to their Phosphor Carbines if they take any, which means that weapon won't have any penalties for moving and firing with assault weapons. I think this one certainly could be handy. You can literally see how far your opponent's units are at the start of the turn and decide whether you need that guaranteed 6-inch movement to get all of that sulphur breath in range, or whether you can chance it and just roll and advance as per normal. I think that this one will definitely see play, particularly if you're taking large units. The Raiders, on the other hand, have Tactica Obliqua, which is an expensive but very frustrating stratagem, which could make these guys absolutely excellent screening units. Basically, this one is a runaway type move as soon as they're charged. It costs 2 command points, your opponent declares a charge on them, and in lieu of firing their Overwatch, they just get to move as if it were the movement phase. Now these guys have a 12-inch move, so unless anything gets in their way, terrain-wise or anything, that means they should be able to guarantee that their opponent can't make a charge even if they were stood right next to them. A lot of units in enemy armies like to deep strike right at the edges of your forces and try and make 9-inch charges with various buffs. This means that if your army has a unit of these raiders strung out around them and shielding them from deep strike, it means that the enemy units could come down in the movement phase, then you pop this stratagem and suddenly those skirmishy dog horses are nowhere to be found, and your opponent's fancy assault unit just sits there in the breeze, all ready to be gunned down by something next turn. This could really spoil the day of any enemy army that's really trying to deal its damage in the assault phase as opposed to the shooting phase. This could really make a Blood Angels player very unhappy. In terms of stratagems from the core Admech Codex, we have the 2 Doctrina Imperatives, the same that can be applied to your standard Skitarii infantry units. You get to add 1 to hit in the shooting phase, or it can be +2 to hit if the unit has an enhanced data tether, which means that you could have your raiders hitting very accurately, even potentially hitting on 2s even if they advance this turn. There's also the Conqueror Doctrina Imperative, which will make these guys so much more efficient in close combat. They're typically only hitting on 4s, so jumping to hit that on 2s if they've got an enhanced data tether, or 3s if they haven't, is a really meaningful combat buff and will lead to more dead enemy models. Naturally, both of these are going to be far more efficient if they're on a big 9-man unit rather than just a small 3-man or something. If you've got a max-sized unit of Serberys Raiders charging into an Orc mob, for example, this one would be the difference of about 4 or 5 dead Orcs, so it's pretty meaningful. In terms of some Forge World specific ones, Lucius has the potential to put them in deep strike, and Synergies 8 could be really good on those Sulphurhounds, as it gives them a pre-game move, which means they could easily be getting those pistol weapons in range right from turn 1. Of course the Raiders already get that pre-game move, so it's not really useful on them. So how would I think about actually using these guys in game then? In terms of unit build, I think that you could either go for the small units for more morale resistance and to just be a bit more of an incidental annoying threat, potentially for screening the army, or you could try and make them your damage dealers, in which case it's probably going to be 9-man units, and maybe think about some way of coordinating for some morale mitigation, which I think an Archaeopter could be a really solid choice for. In general, for the Sulphurhounds, I don't think I'd pick up the phosphor carbines in general circumstances. They're not bad points for fire output, but it just means that you're putting a lot of points in a unit that's already not all that hard to gun down point for point. In general, I'd think about the data tether for a big unit of raiders if I wanted to help mitigate morale. Naturally, in game, I think both units are just going to be wanting to close to get in range with their various weapons. The Sulphurhounds are going to need to be fairly on point. You don't want them just deployed somewhere back in your army, so they have to spend several turns moving up. They're going to need to be fairly on the edge of your deployment zone, rushing straight towards the enemy to get in range as soon as possible. I think Synergies really is a really good choice for them for that, just because of that pre-game move. For the Raiders, I think it's really helpful to be able to use them as a sort of screening and midfield sort of force straight from turn 1. That pre-game move can mean that they are able to maybe take positions in the battlefield that the enemy might be wanting to move into, or maybe block lines of movement for big vehicles or knights in between buildings. It really depends on what you're fighting. I think that you could absolutely go for first turn charges if you wanted to, if your enemy is playing a pure gun line, and just getting a bunch of cavalry horses in the midst of them, maybe locking up units and stopping them shooting, could be disruptive to their battle plans, and of course you can try and do a bit of opportunistic character sniping along the way. Those galvanic carbines don't have amazing damage output against anything, but they are pretty much effective against every unit in the game, thanks to that mortal wound output, which they can just chip in to trim down whatever target you think most needs dealing with. Obviously characters being one of the preferences. For the Raiders, if you are fighting a melee army, then I'd strongly consider using them to screen out a good part of the army, and then use their running away trick to leave melee units high and dry. They could even potentially trot straight back up to the melee units the turn after, and then when they try and charge them again, repeat the whole trick, provided you have enough command points for it. In terms of close combat, I think both of them are far more sort of bully units as opposed to true combat units. They'll make a decent job of chewing through enemy light infantry or troops choices, but if they actually come against a proper melee threat, then they will fold pretty quickly. I'd be looking to go for isolated troops units, or maybe depleted units of more heavy-hitting units to try and finish them off with a mass amount of strength 4 attacks. Particularly with big units, I'd certainly be thinking about using the various Doctrina imperatives each time I shoot and fight, if it is going to make a meaningful difference to the amount of casualties, and that might help get early damage done in the game. Overall, I think that both of these guys could certainly have uses in the Admech force, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them cropping up in various lists. I suspect that the Raiders are probably the slightly more competitive choice of the two, mainly just because they're so much cheaper, therefore a lot tougher, and they really are an excellent screening and harassment unit for the Admech that they can include for a very cheap points cost. The Sulphurhounds, while obviously having far more damage, I just think have a little bit more chance of doing absolutely nothing in the course of a game if they don't manage to get their breath in range and just get shot down on turn 1 while they're trying to make their way up the board. I'll certainly be interested to see what people try and make use of them in their lists though. It's definitely a good time to be an Admech player, list building creativity wise. So let me know your thoughts and opinions on these guys down in the comments below. If there's any strategies that I haven't thought about, or if there's any rules that I've messed up, then let me know and I'll post any corrections in a pinned comment. If you've been enjoying the videos, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I will be having regular Admech stuff coming out over the next couple of weeks, trying to give a good review of most of the core units in the codex now that we have the details of Engine War. If you'd like to help support the channel, I'd just like to mention my Element Games and Amazon affiliate links, where if you were thinking about buying in some model soldiers, then you can help support the channel by doing so. Element Games is a discount retailer in the UK, giving 10 to 20% off Warhammer 40,000 products when you order it in online. If you click the link in the description and make an order, then a small amount of the money goes to support Auspex Tactics without costing you any more. So it could be a good way to support the channel if you were going to buy something anyway. There's a similar link for Amazon for people in the USA and Canada, where if you click that link, literally any Amazon purchases in general for the next 24 hours, a small bit goes to help support the channel, again without costing you any more, whether you're buying model soldiers or something completely different. A big thank you to the people who have been using these, it really does help justify me spending all this time making review videos. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.